All right, cool.
Oh, yeah.
Well, or did you want to say a welcome?
Oh, you're the man?
Okay, well, welcome to Living in the Scriptures. With the new bylaw in Grand Prairie, we thought we'd be good examples and wear our masks here today. But welcome, thanks for joining us. And today we're looking at the Beatitude. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. So my first question was, have you guys ever been really hungry or thirsty?
Oh, I laughed when you talked about the story of, the train going by and knowing that the bag of groceries on
I
it.
thought you had it. No, I thought you had it. Oh, man.
That really happened.
I thought to myself, yeah, no wonder you guys parted ways.
Yeah, it could have been connected to that. I don't remember.
I can remember a fairly similar story, probably maybe not as destitute as yours, but I remember a friend of mine and we would go and, go onto the town. We were like 13, 14 years old and go to the arcade, and we'd spend all our money on the arcade. And the bus was late. We missed like 2 buses, and so we were like 2 or 3 hours late, later than we thought of going. And it must have been like 7, 8, 9 o'clock when we hadn't eaten since like lunchtime, and I don't think we had that much. And I think we were freezing cold, one of the coldest days in Vancouver, and we scrounged up, which would have been probably about 50 cents at that time, to buy a small package of McDonald's French fries. And to this day, my friend Frank and I always reminisce and think, those are the best French fries we have ever tasted in our entire. And it's just like, I totally. When you kind of like feel like that was like hunger and thirst for something, man, those French fries were the most amazing. I don't think McDonald's has ever made French fries better than that.
Yeah, and for me, when you said, we don't really have an experience similar to what they would have had, I have to think pretty hard for a time that I was that hungry. Like maybe at camp we did a river trip and someone there needed some water and needed some snacks, so I gave up mine. So that means I had to wait till supper to eat. And I was hungry on the trip back. That's honestly,
Yeah.
I think probably most days I feel hungry, and sometimes I feel like I'm pretty hungry, and not at all like what we're talking about in the story there. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a little hard for us to really understand maybe this picture of hunger and thirst. People who really are desperate for food and desperate for water, they know how desperately they need something. It's life and death. For us, it's never life and death when it comes to eating or drinking, really.
And you mentioned Psalm 42, and I have to say Psalm 42 is among my favorite psalms. One of them is like just arguing against yourself. Why are you downcast? But really, that first line, as the deer pants for water, we usually like to see it as like a nice little like inspirational poster, like as the deer pants. But when you really think about it, that's exactly what they're describing. The deer is like desperate for water. And are we desperately seeking the living waters of God?
Yeah, so the first looked at 3 areas on Sunday of righteousness, and the first one was salvation, that Jesus is, through faith we become righteous. He is our righteousness, as the Bible puts it. So any thoughts on that part of righteousness that we're supposed to hunger and thirst after?
Well, I remember, I've brought it up before, I just remember nights spent, a little over a decade ago where I wasn't sure of where I stood with the Lord, knowing that I needed to be right with Him, and and coming to a place realizing like that really is the only thing that matters. Everything else will ultimately not. Like I know I see here right now that this is the one thing that I need. And when you're hungering and thirsting, it's like it doesn't matter if you've got the money. It doesn't matter if you've got. It doesn't matter what you have. It's a singular sort of desire and focus. And and I think that when it comes to the question of salvation, and it's absolutely true what you said, we need to be saved in every heart and every soul. When it comes right down to it, we need that right relationship with the Lord, with our Creator, with our Maker, with our Savior, and I think that there is, at least that was part of my experience, was just this awareness that this is all that I need, and until I had that peace that I had it, it was the only thing that was on my mind. It was this kind of all-consuming thing, like, am I okay with the Lord? Will I be with Him when my life on earth is over? And yeah, it was a experience of hungering and thirsting in those days, for sure. Yeah.
Maybe it's your story, or maybe it's your mask, Ephesians. It just kind of brought to my mind Revelation, 7 churches, and Jesus' words to the church in Ephesus was like, have you forgotten your first love? And it's even as you were preaching, it kind of reminded me of that. What was your first love? Because so often we can forget after 30 odd years of journeying with Jesus. All of a sudden, all sorts of other things kind of crowd that. Am I doing ministry right? Am I sharing this properly? Or you get caught up in I want to be cautious when I say lesser truths, but I kind of sit there and think, yeah, some of the lesser truths, you want to put piece together the theology and everything else. But the ultimate thing is, like, have I lost that first love? And, as Kaleb was talking about, that like you said, somehow, I remember before Christ intercepted my life, just feeling lost and discombobulated in some way. I could look back at it and realize spiritually I was like hungering and thirsting, it was disorientating. That's probably the best way I can describe that feeling before, just realizing, I don't have purpose. I don't know what my life is all about. There's something broken in me that I can feel and sense. I couldn't call it sin. I didn't call it sin. That was something that I learned when Christ came into my life. But I knew that I wouldn't measure up. And just as you preached, I just have to remember that first love. Remember that first love. You've kind of gone away, and it just, like I said, reminded me of Jesus' words to the Ephesus church, and just kind of sitting there saying, yeah, you know what, you got your theology right, you're still doing all these good works and stuff like that, but you've forgotten that first love. And I think that's such a reminder for many of us who probably journeyed for a while and just kind of lose that. It's just like, oh yeah.
Yeah, we take it for granted almost. It's almost maybe like when we compare it to hunger and eating. If you have a really, really, really good steak, right? That's awesome. But if you have steak 3 times a day, 7 days a week, after a while, you don't appreciate it as much as the first time. And we have to be careful that the riches of Christ don't somehow become so normal to us that we don't see the greatness, the value of them anymore.
I think that the way that you presented this topic in moving from salvation to sanctification to saltification really speaks to that question of like the need to kind of progress in the direction, and we don't just stay on this stake, I guess. Or and there's a temptation there, but the fact is that we are being called onward, and we'll go there, I'm sure, here today, but so good that there's more to life. Like Christ actually has more to life to call us into. He has new seasons beyond salvation, and we can still hunger and thirst. Sometimes it's uncomfortable to be in that position of hungering and thirsting. Like it's a nice thought. It is like an inspirational, but just like you said, like it's actually not comfortable. It has a good purpose in our life, but sometimes it's not very comfortable.
Well, let's get to that second part then, the sanctification, that we should hunger and thirst to become more righteous in our attitudes, in our actions, and so on. And one of the things I was thinking about was Abraham, and it says that his faith was accredited to him as righteousness, so he was righteous based on faith,
Yep.
which maybe we could see as salvation in Genesis chapter 15. And then in chapter 16, he demonstrates a lack of faith, takes things into his own hands, has sex with his wife's servant, right?
Yeah.
So he wasn't perfect. Even though he was accredited as righteous
Yeah.
for his faith, he was still in a growing process. And maybe we can identify with that too, that we still hunger and thirst for more righteousness in our own characters, in our own lives.
Mm-hmm.
You can identify with that?
I can. I can.
Well,
Okay.
isn't it that line, like, God saves us where we are, he doesn't leave us,
Yeah.
but he doesn't leave us where we are?
Yeah.
And yeah, you can kind of look at my 30 odd years of journeying with Jesus, and I think there's always this like dissatisfaction, holy discontent is what I think some have called it, right? That you're not where you want to be, but you're glad you're not where you used to be.
Yeah.
And I think maybe the thing I would tell people is, and I've talked to so many people about this, it is, it's not perfection that defines us. It's actually the desire towards it that does. That Romans chapter 7 is, I think, the Christian at the top of his game. Not a Christian like, oh, woe is me, I'm whatever, but a Christian that recognizes, as was it C.S. Lewis said, you never know how strong the wind is until you kind of turn around and face it. So, before you faced your sin, stared it down, you're just kind of rolling along with it. You never know how much of a grip and how deeply rooted it is into your heart and all the things that you do and your thoughts and your motives until you actually turn around and you're just like, no, this is not who I want to be. And then you realize just how much the flesh has intertwined with everything about you, and deep inside you're a new creation. And maybe this is like an encouragement for all of you guys, is that be encouraged. If you're in the fight, be encouraged. Christ is alive. Christ in me, the hope of glory. He's going to bring to completion something. Because it's easy. For me, I know I can be so discouraged. I look at something like, oh gosh, you're an idiot. Like, why did I do that again? Like, I don't do what I want to do, and I do. That's Christ in you. That's the glory.
Yeah, and I do think maybe as we mature and grow, we also become more sensitive to the sin that is still within us. And so it might appear to us like we're not growing, we're still struggling, but really it's maybe on a different level when we look back. I know people that when they first come to Christ, they don't even realize that living together without being married is a sin. And then all of a sudden that dawns on them that it's not right, it's not righteous to be together without being married. And then a few years later, as they grow, they realize all more things, but it's even becoming more and more refined in their relationship.
In your guys' experience, do you think that with as you grow and you just accumulate more life experience, you actually begin to see, okay, I'm saved and forgiven, but there are still consequences to my actions, and grace doesn't shelter me from the consequences, like not always, or maybe not to the full extent. And so I need to be growing in righteousness because it actually like makes a difference in my life. It makes a difference in the lives of those around me, and you start to see your own weakness. You start to see your own failure. Do you understand what I'm kind of asking? Like you see the consequences of. I don't think we see or understand the full consequences necessarily of our sin. And as we're saved, I think God graciously lets us fail or lets us go, maybe wander a bit and see, you really do need to stick with me, and you need to hunger for an excellent life because of the consequences of falling short of that. Even though you're forgiven, like it still is influencing and impacting others. You need, I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's just, as you were talking, that's something that I thought about And part of the hungering and thirsting for righteousness and sanctification, I really do think, is that hard piece of not giving. I think we give, at least I have been very tempted to give myself a pass on certain character defects, or certain, just times where I'm content instead of striving for righteousness.
2 out of 3 ain't bad.
2 out of 3, that's, man. When you said, Brian, 6 out of 9 ain't bad, you listed the fruits, said 6 out of 9 ain't bad, I turned to my wife and I said, that's like 2 out of 3 ain't bad. That's the same ratio.
Yeah.
And then you went there and I was so happy. What a good example. And that was, anyway.
Actually, I read the lyrics again afterwards, and the second verse, I don't know if you know it well enough to know the second verse, he actually explains why he said that to his girl in the first verse.
I only remember the chorus of that song, but...
Okay, well, in the first verse, he's with this girl, and he said, you can cry all night, it's not going to change my mind. I want you, I need you, but I'm never going to love you, right? And then the second verse, he says, the reason is because my heart is only for this other girl that I love, and this is what she said to me. She said, I want you, I need you, but I'm never going to love you. So it's kind of like perpetuating it. He was hurt, So
the burn.
And he said, 2 out of 3, that's not enough for me, and so I can't.
What a good picture of like idolatry too. Like the things that, the idols that we chase after, they seek for us, but they don't love us.
No.
They burn us, and then we do the same to God, right?
Wow, and isn't that what Scripture tells us? Psalmist talks about like the commands of God is the path of life. That the further we jump into them, the further we become more Christ-like, there's more life in us. And the opposite is true, right? It says that the wages of sin is death.
Yeah.
And I think it was Andy Stanley who said something along the lines of, that means every sin that we have is gift wrapped with a little bit of death. That, it's just not, at the end of our lives and we stand before God and whatever, but every sin in our lives comes with a little bit of death. Gift wrapped with it, and I think that's what some of the consequences, some of the things kind of come into our lives. The brokenness. If you use Abraham's example, sleeping with Hagar, brought a whole whack of death into his life, right?
Yeah.
And when I say death, I don't mean physical death. I just mean we all know when you're living and when you're feeling like things are kind of going south on you. Well, lots of things went south in Abraham's life. God used it. God continued to journey with him. God had grace for him, but it was a hard, lesson learned. And I think that, as Kaleb was talking about, where this kind of comes from. I think I've seen it in my life, right? Some of the sins, some of the brokenness that come. There's consequences. Every sin is gift wrapped with a little piece of death.
Yeah, and when you're tasting a little bit of that, you hunger and thirst for
real life,
for righteousness.
So we looked at the fruits of the Spirit in terms of possible areas of growth. Is there one that kind of jumped out at you, or where you thought out of those 9, there's room for growth, or?
Yeah, I think
a hunger for growth.
I think I've got 8 of them just now, and then it's just one.
I thought you were going to say 6 out of 9.
4 out of 9? No. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. I mean, even if you got the first 8, that 9, self-control, how many times would, if you could master self, I think that's one thing for me, and maybe it's a tape in my head because I've never been particularly great at it, except for certain situations. Whenever I'm playing sports, generally, I'm really focused and able to keep my temper and emotions and my whole body in check toward the goal. In other areas, I'm not. I think self-control continues to be one where I would love to be able to be excellent in all areas of my life in self-control. Yeah.
Yeah, and someone in our life group, actually, that very comment came in our life group. We talked about that after church on Sunday a bit, self-control, and somebody mentioned, yeah, I would really like kindness to grow in me, but it takes self-control to be kind to people at all times, in all situations. Yeah. So that is a key. Yeah.
It's a good way of putting it. There's a discipline to all of those. There's a discipline to actually keeping our eyes upon Jesus, right? I was going to say joy and love for others, and when I think about joy, when you guys talk about that self-control, I think about Paul's words that says rejoice, and I say again rejoice. Dude's in prison, right? Like there's like mastery over all of the other voices because like if you throw me in jail, I'd be like, God, why am I in here? What is going on? How long? Whatever. It's like Paul just says rejoice. Say it again, rejoice. It's like he emphasizes it, and I think there's that discipline of keeping our eyes upon Jesus and kind of growing in our joy and our love for others. So,
if I could introduce a different question. I mean, it's always really encouraging to see other people and to identify a fruit in their life, and because we don't have it all, but there are certain people. When you think about the fruits, it maybe gives us a perspective on how other people are different than us. And is there someone, I don't know, maybe even in this group, or is there someone in the church or in your family where you can regularly see, like, man, this is someone who's really, I can see God, this gift is really evident in their life. Maybe let's pick one person or something like that and say, if I can put us on the spot to say someone else, I don't know. Like if we were going to do it right here, okay?
If we were going to, or we are going to?
Well, I'm going to, and I don't want to. So Peter, when I think about like the love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control, I see faithfulness as being a big fruit in your life. You've had a long ministry here at McLaurin, and there's a lot more left. You've got, and you were faithful. I've seen it in the way that you talk about even your previous work. I think that faithfulness is, I see it in the way that you, with your family and with your kids, and you're consistent. You show up. Like, you don't mail it in, and you're faithful to the task, and you're faithful to what God's called you to, and I recognize that in you very, very strongly, and I wanted to tell you that. So,
all right, thank you.
Awesome.
There you go. And Brian, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. I see you as being, in a lot of situations, someone who loves well, who sees another person and is able to identify kind of what they need, and you're willing to insert yourself for some advice. You're ready to say, well, how can I help? How can I better your life? How can I lead you to God? Even if it's a difficult situation, or like you're willing to engage in that way. And we've only worked together for a short time, but I've kind of known you a bit before, and I've been able to see that, and that was something that stood out to me as I was thinking about you.
Well, I actually, the first person that came to my mind was Bob Neufeld. And in terms of joy, someone who, I don't know if I've ever seen him not smile. Even though life, I'm sure, is not always easy.
Have you been to a hockey game with him?
No, I have not been to a hockey game with him. Okay.
He'll smile the whole time, even if he's got something to say about the refs.
Okay. No, but there's somebody who I think is is showing the gift, the fruit of joy.
Absolutely.
Something that came to your mind?
Well, I think, just down the street from them, Paul and Lila Poliski, talking about faithfulness, that, long obedience in the same direction,
Yeah.
And the joy, the willingness to share. I kind of feel like, man, I'd love to grow old like those people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing good to remember is that these are fruits of the Spirit and not of our own efforts and work. So we can't grow them ourselves just because we try harder. We have to rely on the Spirit. So it's a matter of making it an item of prayer, praying for one another, and submitting it to God, and allowing Him to do the work in us.
Mm-hmm. And there's seasons of life too where I think that they're very evident even in our own lives to ourselves. And there are seasons where maybe there's pruning going on. We don't see it as much. But and that's why it's so good to have community, because there are times when I don't see the fruit in my life. But if another person had any idea, they can see it readily,
Yeah.
So it's there beneath the bush. So
Yeah. Right on. Okay, so let's talk about this third area of saltification, as we called it, because right after the Beatitudes it says that we are the salt of the earth, and how we are supposed to be promoting righteousness. There's many examples in Scripture of God's kind of command for us to look after people that are suffering, to right the wrongs in the world, to be involved in bringing about justice. There's another passage that came to mind was Matthew 25, where Jesus says, I was hungry and you didn't give me anything to eat. I was thirsty, you didn't give me anything to drink. So it's our responsibility, I guess, as followers of Christ to help feed the hungry, and to visit the ones that are shut-ins and in prison. What do you feel like is our responsibility when it comes to being salt in helping to promote righteousness in the world where there's so much not right?
I think, something like that could be so overwhelming, because there's always so much injustice. Or, when you say about hunger, it's like, oh man, like everybody's hungry, and, world hunger. I do appreciate that Matthew 25 passage. I think some of it is like, God says, I'm not asking you to do everything. I'm asking you to do something.
Yeah.
And I can't remember who said it. It's like, they said, start with the person closest to you. The people around you. Like, it's just like, where can we serve? Where can we help? Where can we turn some of these things around? How can I bring a little bit of the kingdom of God into this world tangibly? Because this is all God's kingdom, right?
Yeah.
And how has God ministered to me? Then how am I going to minister to those around us? And hopefully there will be a few like William Wilberforces around who will like sit there and it's like I'm going to grab something in a bigger way. But all of us are called to be God's hands and feet in that capacity. After all, if you really think about it, like isn't that what Jesus does? He doesn't. He's not trying to run a campaign or something, but he loves those who kind of come before him.
Yeah.
Every person that comes before him, he's there.
Yeah. Right.
Something about salt is not an action item. It's just a presence item. And light is the same thing. It has an effect, but it's either present or absent. And so I take salt and light to be a call to show up as you are. And in the places where Christians show up and are present, they bring God with them, whether they're at their best or sometimes their worst.
I think you're right on something like that. I think in a previous life, as I was working in industry, some of the most impactful times I've ever had were just being in the lunchroom with people and sharing stories, and they would share their crazy stories, and I would share my stories, and that was some of the most impactful times I've ever had with people. And I think some of it is showing up and just showing your saltiness, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it. Just that totally reminds me of John Stott, right? Like when John Stott says, in those times they didn't have refrigeration, salt was the preservative, and his question was, nobody asked why the meat went bad. People asked where the salt was.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like what? Like, don't ask why. You know, things are going bad. Ask the question, where's the salt? Where's the preservative?
And I just want to say one more thing about, you mentioned that when it comes to being salt and light, we think it's this Herculean task because of how dark the world is. And we see the darkness more and more. And something that has helped me immensely, and I encourage people to do, is it's very true that we can't preserve everything. We can't be everywhere. And I thought your advice was great. You know, we can be where we are. We can be to the people close to us. And it's important that we know what our purpose is. But it's important for us also to pray. I think the Psalms, when we think about the evil in the world, there's lots of, I think, ammunition in the Psalms, or just there's opportunities for us to find our heart cry and cry out against the wickedness in the world. And there are times, something that's been super encouraging to me, I've been grieved often by the sexual abuse that goes on in the world in the name of personal freedoms, and there are times where I've in recent months where I've just cried out to the Lord, said, Lord, I want you to destroy the works of darkness in our world. I'd love you to expose the deeds of darkness in the world. I'd love you to shine a light on the corruption, and I'd love you to destroy the people who are perpetuating this evil in the world. Would you stop them? Would you save them? Or would you even destroy them if that's for the best? But would you act, and would you see it, and you can do stuff? And I've seen a couple social media movements now that are rising up saying the pornography websites are full of crime and abuse, and these movements are getting tons of traction. And so as I've been praying, I've been seeing, you know, God is actually, he is on the move in some of these areas. And that's a huge vent for me when I can take some time and just pray against evil and pray that God would act in history to root it out and to overcome it. And I think there's a lot of power in those prayers, and it's way better for me than feeling like helpless, because it's not anything that I really, it's not in my sphere of influence at this time, you know what I mean? So yeah, that's a piece of advice for, if you feel if it's common experience, if you feel overwhelmed by the darkness, just start praying big prayers for God to destroy, because that's what he's coming to do someday. There's a day when it's going to be done. It's coming. So anyway,
maybe one encouraging thought too is that the Beatitude says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, they will be filled, not those who achieve righteousness will be filled. Like, the hunger and thirst in and of itself is that which fills us. And so we keep hungering, we keep thirsting for righteousness in the world, we keep praying for it, and it's that which the Lord blesses and fills us, as long as we continue to have that hunger and thirst. Even if we don't, you know, until we're in heaven, we're not going to see all righteousness fulfilled.
Yeah. It's coming, no?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Any final words?
Any final words?
Stay hungry.
Stay hungry, yeah. That's right.
Stay thirsty.
All right, good. Lord bless you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
See you on Sunday. Blessings.
Yep.